Wish TV, All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
Focusing on issues that matter to you.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage, exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders, expert analysis on critical legislation. From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. Congressman Andre Carson says immigration and customs enforcement should be either significantly reformed or abolished in its current form. He's one of more than 150 Democrats who have signed on to articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. This follows last weekend's fatal shooting of a protester in Minneapolis by a Border Patrol agent. I asked Carson about the changes he wants to see at the Department of Homeland Security. Let's bring in Congressman Andre Carson. Congressman, welcome back to All Indiana Politics.
What an honor. Thank you.
How much of the videos have you seen of the shooting of Alex Preddy, and what are some things from those videos that stand out to you?
I've seen many of them. They're very disappointing. They're very disheartening. It speaks to overreach. It speaks to excess. It speaks to an agency that was chartered by Congress that began wanting to enforce and oversee the contraband coming into our country by criminal enterprises that was, men and women who wanted to serve our country honorably signed up for this agency that had a lot of prestige. But now it has devolved into a Gestapo of sorts. It has devolved into a rogue militia, a gang simply dutied with carrying out Donald Trump's very destructive and hateful agenda.
You serve on a subcommittee on the House Intelligence Committee that oversees at least the intelligence functions of the Department of Homeland Security. Have you been able to gain any insight into what happened in both the Alex Preddy and Renee Good shootings as a result?
Our committee has had a few meetings where we're pushing the chairman and we're pushing Republicans to hold a top secret hearing with us so we can discuss these matters and press our former colleague, now Secretary Noem, about what is happening. As someone who worked in counterterrorism and counterintelligence in the Indiana Department of Homeland Security, I'm deeply concerned. Since Donald Trump took office last year, there have been at least 28 shootings by immigration agents, resulting in 8 deaths, and 5 of these deaths were of U.S. citizens. ICE is detaining close to 4,000 children, maybe even more. That includes about 20 infants. And so he has filled ICE with people who have no regard for the Constitution. And as a former police officer, I can tell you that we took an oath to serve and protect and to defend the Constitution and follow the spirit and letter of the law.
Border Czar Tom Homan is now leading operations in Minneapolis. How confident are you that that will lead to a change in tactics?
I would hope so. I'm not confident. I think what we're seeing right now with Secretary Noem and others refusing to issue the kind of reformation that is needed. When reformation doesn't work, elimination must happen. So if Tom Homan is still about doing business as usual, then I'm not excited about it. And I can't be, and I won't be. The more neighbors come together, the stronger our resistance to beat back this fascism we're living under, the more we work together. And it's important that not only activists, concerned citizens, and the fourth estate, the media, is important in this. Social media has been great at telling these stories, and the media has done a great job at picking up these stories.
What specific changes do you want to see within DHS?
Listen, my concern is having an administration, having DHS leadership greenlight everything that Donald Trump wants. If it means bypassing Fourth Amendment protections in the name of Donald Trump, I'm against it. If it means enforcing a very racist Project 2025 agenda, I'm against it. If it means enforcing a myth of making America great again and taking us to a mythical place that never existed, and Trump is masterful at symbolism, if it means calming his base by showing imagery of women, children, Black and brown communities being targeted and being scapegoats for having taken good jobs from other Americans, I'm against it. And so I think that as we talk about these things in a very real and serious way, I think it's important that DHS listens to people who are concerned, that DHS understands that it's a very diverse agency. It has struggled since its inception, but a democracy can only thrive when people are heard. And as I said, as a former law enforcement, I'm deeply concerned about the new folks who have been recruited to carry out these violations of human rights.
Is impeaching Secretary Noem an appropriate response?
I think it is. I think she has failed in terms of her leadership. She has not shown the kind of administrative prowess that many were expecting, having served as a governor, that's necessary. When you're dealing with reformation of an organization, it takes time, but it also takes cooperation from senior personnel and newer personnel who have been there and listening to citizens on the ground who have complaints. That has not been done. She's taking directives from the president, who she reports to, but the president has been unbridled and unchecked. That is outside of the vision of the founding fathers. So I think eliminating ICE as we know it, it doesn't mean an elimination of immigration law, but it does mean a call for humane enforcement. ICE can and did function in a very humane way years ago, particularly under President Obama. There were deportations, but it was done with due process, without killing citizens, without harassing citizens. That was never their mandate. It functioned previously in a way. It functioned where, with an order of deportation, you had a court appearance. There was a judge. That has been eliminated. There is now no law and order, just unchecked power and really cruelty, ordered by an administration that has no respect for human dignity or the law.
I want to be clear on something you just said. So are you saying that ICE should be eliminated, period, or do you believe ICE should be reformed and reconstituted?
I'm saying if reformation doesn't work, then elimination should be the mandate. And ICE, as we know it, should no longer exist. It has to be replaced with something else.
Congressman Andre Carson, thank you for joining us.
What an honor. Thank you.
Indiana's congressional Republicans say they're backing ICE. Congresswoman Erin Houchin says ICE is a legitimate federal law enforcement agency, and calls to abolish it are reckless and dangerous. These law enforcement officers risk their lives every day to protect our communities and uphold the rule of law. Congressman Marlon Stutzman says ICE has taken criminals off the street throughout the country, despite some localities willingly choosing to make their job more difficult. I stand with ICE leadership, agents, and officers as they work to make America safer. Coming up, state lawmakers advance a temporary funding solution for child care vouchers. I'll explain how it works. Welcome back. The state Senate has approved a temporary funding mechanism for Indiana's child care voucher program. The bill does not address either eligibility or reimbursement rates for those vouchers, but it does open up at least the possibility of funding to stabilize the existing program. Child care advocates call the vote great news. They say it's not a permanent fix, but it will stop the bleeding.
This will reduce pressure on the waiting list. This will prevent further growth of unmet needs. It will help to stabilize provider after the CCDF reduction and the CCDF waiting list to some extent.
When state lawmakers passed the budget last year, they set aside $300 million for the Financial Responsibility and Opportunity Growth, or FROG Fund. The state could only use it for correctional facility operations, Medicaid, or the Family and Children Fund. On Thursday morning, the Senate approved a bill that allows the money to go to the child care voucher program as well. The bill passed unanimously.
I will say this is just a Band-Aid on CCDF. It's a much larger problem, and next year I will be presenting you with some very large numbers, and we will have some very difficult decisions to make.
Top Senate Republicans say the vouchers most likely will only get part of that fund. Senate Democrats say it will help cover expenses for children who are currently on the program.
If the funds are used from that FROG fund it will only be sufficient to continue the current program with the reduced eligibility threshold of 128%. So it would stabilize the program as it currently exists.
The State Budget Committee would have to approve any proposals to move money to the voucher program. Kadura says he'd like to expand eligibility back to 150% of the federal poverty level next year, since budget analysts estimate the state could have a $5 billion surplus by then. Osman says the Senate vote shows lawmakers are listening.
They have seen the strain, they have seen the pressure on families and providers and children, and they are trying to work to resolve the problems. So it gives us a room to enter and try to work around. Then if you are convinced we have an issue and we need policy changes, let's work on permanent solution for us.
The bill now has to get through the House. There's about a month left in the legislative session. And coming up, Indiana's best political team assesses that proposal and gives us a legislative halftime report.
The opinions expressed by guests on this broadcast are solely those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Wish TV.
And welcome back to All Indiana Politics. Joining us now are the two newest members of Indiana's best political team. Former Republican State Representative Matt Bell and former Democratic State Representative Karlee Macer. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, sir. Great to be with you, ma'am.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's begin with that child care funding mechanism we just talked about. The fund that lawmakers want to pull from has about $300 million in it, but the voucher program likely will not get all of it. Karlee, is this going to stabilize the child care system?
I mean, it's just a temporary fix. I mean, what Hoosier families really need is the stability of the long-term funding. But certainly, we're going to take what we can get right now.
Matt, how likely is it this gets through the House? There was some similar legislation on the House side, but it never went anywhere.
I think that this will be a conversation between fiscal leaders. It's pretty robust during the second half, but this is a concern for all Hoosiers. I mean, no one wanted to be in this position, right? Unfortunately, a decision was made by a previous administration to use some one-time money to put more folks in the program. We hit a cliff, and now we have a wait list. So legislators are doing exactly what they should. Let's find a way to temporarily band-aid this and then have a big discussion around it next year, because we've got a real problem to fix in Indiana. And I think everyone from the governor, Republicans in the House, and even in a bipartisan fashion are willing to face and fix that challenge.
That's right. It is a bipartisan issue. I mean, we know it's pro-growth, pro-family. It should be a no-brainer.
Let's turn to Minneapolis for a moment, and this does actually tie in with something at the State House I want to get to in a moment. So, Matt, we had 2 U.S. citizens shot and killed by 2 different agencies within DHS over the span of a month. That first shooting of Renee Good was by an ICE agent, the second shooting of Alex Preddy by a Border Patrol agent. Should top DHS leadership, including Secretary Kristi Noem, step down, and should ICE either be heavily reformed or abolished, as Congressman Carson was proposing?
Well, anytime there's a premature loss of life, we should all grieve. We had to more than 150 times with murders last year in Indianapolis alone. And so seeing citizens die prematurely is a terrible thing to see anytime. I think we haven't seen this in Indiana because on day one and from day one, Governor Braun said Indiana is going to cooperate with federal enforcement to find the worst offenders in our state, and we're going to remove them. Unfortunately, in Minnesota, a different decision was made by local and state officials, which has led to conflict and to the tragic loss of life. I'm so glad that the border czar is now on the ground in Minnesota. I think you've seen on the ground and in the Senate and the White House a willingness to have a 2-week conversation about what DHS and ICE look like. That's going to allow us not to shut down the government. I look forward to that conversation. I think that we will leave that conversation with the ability to enforce our country's laws and a better understanding of how we'll support that across the aisle.
Yeah.
Karlee, I'll let you respond to that as well, but also, how do scenes like this on a national scale impact how people interact with their law enforcement back here at home, particularly at the city and county level?
Yeah, well, first of all, public safety. I mean, it's the trust that Americans deserve and Hoosiers expect. So whether it's in Minneapolis or it's right here in the state of Indiana, the expected is, to be able to trust. And we know that anytime an American citizen is killed, by a federal agent, there should be accountability and transparency. This is not political. It's not political. It's about trust. And it all trickles down to every community across this country, including the communities that we live in.
So this actually does lead me into a piece of legislation that passed the Indiana House on Wednesday. It would create a dedicated military police response force within the Indiana National Guard. It would consist exclusively of military police and Air National Guard security forces. Those are, of course, specific job functions within the military. House Republicans have pitched this as a way to have a dedicated standby force anytime the Guard is called up for a law enforcement support mission. Karlee, do they have a point in doing that?
You know, I think that it's pushing the envelope a little too far. I think that our National Guard is there to support us in very important times, such as emergencies. But when you blur the lines between civilian policing and our military, I think, you know, the guardrails, I would also ask, you know, what problem are we really solving? You know, how would this be used? How often, what would this really look like? It's just not something that I think everyday Hoosiers are talking about or thinking about. They're focused on affordability of their lives, as we're supposed to be. This is a legislation of affordability. So, you know, where does this fit in and why are we doing it? I find that to just be so interesting in such an interesting time.
Matt, does this violate the principle of separating military and civilian law enforcement missions?
Doesn't even come close. I give Representative Steve Bartels, who authored the legislation, tremendous credit for writing a piece of legislation that ensures that Indiana will be prepared in times of emergency. No one is empowering the National Guard writ large with policing powers. We're talking about a very finite portion of the Guard and of the Air Guard. And those are military police that are already within those systems. That's about 4% of the total population of those guards. So it's a small group. But what we're saying is that for that group who already has a law enforcement background in military law enforcement, we're going to empower you to work alongside the men and women who protect our cities and towns each day in cases of extreme emergency, so that you can coordinate only that law enforcement group within the Guard, not the Guard at large. I think it's a great move to ensure that Indiana's prepared for any crisis that comes. It ensures that backup will be there, who is trained to interact with the public in the proper way, and that should give Hoosiers confidence and courage.
I've got about 2 minutes left. I apologize. I want to get to one more point. We're now basically at legislative halftime. What have been the biggest legislative hits and misses so far this session? Matt, we'll start with you.
Well, I think that the governor and the legislature came in focused on affordability for Hoosiers, and I think you see that reflected in agendas in both the House and Senate. Obviously, the House is focused on the housing crisis in Indiana as House Bill 1001, recognizing that in too many towns in Indiana, the men and women who protect it, teach, serve food there, can't afford a home there, and that's what they're trying to fix there. They're working on addressing high electric utility costs. With House Bill 1002, that's going to offer levelized billing to every customer in the state, move us from single rate cases to multi-year rate cases. So in a lot of ways, I think those are incredibly responsive to the challenges that Hoosiers are facing every day. On the Senate side, you know, the focus has been on ensuring that there's not waste, fraud, and abuse in our Medicaid system. You know, we know that we have a Medicaid cliff that we're facing. It's grown at 9.5% per year the last decade. We can't sustain that. I think their priorities are in the right place. Working with the governor, the Senate and House Republicans will deliver a great legislative session for Hoosiers.
Karlee, how about you? What are the
Yeah, I
biggest hits and
think I'll just tell you, I think I have a hit and miss all in one, but that is Hunter's Law, where we took the funding away and then suddenly have an amendment that goes back in. So it was a miss and now a hit, so I'll use that. And then I say the miss overall is for Hoosiers, and this early start to the legislative short session already with the redistricting and how we came into it. Hoosiers are deserving of good policy work, and that really shorts them on it. The busyness, the rhetoric, the unfortunate personality disputes, and everything that's happening politically because of that has really hurt Hoosiers with policy.
We're 29 days away from great policy for every Hoosier. I'm counting on the fact that it gets there.
Karlee, Matt, thank you both for coming in today. Thank you for joining us on Indiana's Best Political Team, and we will be right back.
The opinions expressed by guests on this broadcast are solely those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Wish TV.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. And be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.